And people say now, wow, we've never had a president trying to tear down the justice system and attack federal law enforcement officials like Trump is now. Yes, we have. We definitely have, except he was vice president, not president when he did it. His name was Spiro Agnew, and he was facing a 40-count federal criminal felony indictment in 1973.
Because of these tactics which have been employed against me, because small and fearful men have been frightened into furnishing evidence against me, they have perjured themselves in many cases, it's my understanding. I will not resign if indicted. I will not resign if indicted.
Crowd goes wild. Washington Post and New York Times headlines, page A1 in both papers the next day. Agnew declares he will not quit. Agnew declares he will not resign even if indicted. 11 days later, he resigned. Now, this is the crucial point, I think, at least today. I think it is crucial to know that the Justice Department at that time, when they were putting together all of this voluminous, hard evidence against Agnew, they believed that in this vice president, Agnew, they were looking at a man who had committed dozens of felonies. And they believed they were looking at a man who had a very good shot at being the next president of the United States. Not only because vice presidents tend to run for the top job themselves after serving as vice president. I mean, sometimes that works out, sometimes it doesn't. But in Agnew's case, there was an even more immediate expectation that he was going to become president. The Justice Department had very good reason to expect in 1973 that Nixon was going down. The Watergate scandal was getting worse and worse and worse. Nixon was pretty unhealthy by then in lots of ways. His behavior was erratic and strange, which is something that top officials of the Justice Department saw personally in their interactions with Nixon, including the Attorney General himself. I mean, it just seemed like very good odds that if Nixon didn't keel over, there was a very good prospect that he was going to be out. He was going to resign, or he was going to be forced out of office by impeachment, which would, of course, make his vice president president. And his vice president, the Justice Department believed, had committed dozens of felonies, and they had the evidence to back it up. So just think about that moment in time for a second. I mean, think of that moment in time in relation to where we are today, with Trump about to be arraigned on 37 felony counts tomorrow. I mean, we've got Trump saying right now, I will not suspend my campaign because of this indictment. I will never drop out of this campaign. He said this weekend, I will continue to run for president not only after I'm indicted, I will continue to run for president even if I'm convicted. That's what Trump's saying now. In Agnew's case, you just heard him say it. I will not resign if indicted. Very same kind of pledge. But think about how that would work in practical terms. I mean, think about that with the Agnew case. Especially given that, with the benefit of hindsight, we now know that Nixon was out. Nixon didn't get to the end of this term. He was forced out by the Watergate scandal. Think about what that would have meant with Agnew not resigning if indicted. Right? They've got all the evidence against him. Justice Department indicts him. He says he won't resign if indicted. So, okay, let's say they pressed on and they went to trial. He would very likely be convicted on dozens of felony counts. They had very hard evidence against him. So he'd be convicted. He'd get sentenced to jail, quite possibly. It was dozens of felonies. It's not like Espionage Act felonies, but still, it's bad. If he doesn't resign, he goes on trial, he gets convicted and then sentenced to jail, then he's the vice president of the United States in jail. And from jail, what the Justice Department is expecting about Nixon comes true. Nixon goes poof from the presidency. And so now, post-Nixon, we've got the new president governing from jail, from federal prison. Or maybe now that Agnew's president, he tries to pardon himself from prison, but nobody really knows how that would work. Can you do that? Would people obey the order that he proclaimed himself pardoned? It would be chaos. So what do you do in that circumstance if you're the U.S. Department of Justice? What do you do as the Justice Department when you believe you've got someone who you believe has committed dozens of felonies? Felonies in this case that he was only able to commit because he held public office. It was only because he was a high-ranking public official that he was allowed access to these things that allowed him to commit these crimes. What do you do? Do you just prosecute this guy like anyone else? I mean, at a base level, yes, nobody's above the law. We only have one system of law for everyone. Nothing about being an elected official gives you a license to commit crimes or a license to get away with it if you do. The last time we had to contend with something very much like this as a country, the three young idealistic prosecutors who had run this case, who had documented all the bribery and extortion claims against Agnew, who had amassed all the evidence for trial, they wanted not only to put him on trial, they wanted to convict him and put him in jail. But what the Justice Department offered the guy was no jail. It is a decision that is controversial to this day, and for good reason, but that's what they did. The Justice Department insisted that the evidence of all his alleged crimes be made public and put in writing. That's what I showed at the very top of the hour. They put that in writing. They introduced it in open court. They released it to the public. It was printed in all the papers. But in addition to, printing all that evidence that they had of his crimes, they didn't do much else. They let him plead to just one count of tax evasion, and they agreed he would serve 0 jail time. In exchange for that, what he had to agree to was to leave elective office, to resign. Here was the front page of the New York Times. Spiro T. Agnew resigned as Vice President of the United States today under an agreement with the Department of Justice to admit evasion of federal income taxes and avoid imprisonment. The stunning development ending a federal grand jury investigation of Mr. Agnew and probably terminating his political career shocked his closest associates and precipitated an immediate search by President Nixon for a successor. It's interesting, they didn't, as part of the plea deal, they didn't require him to swear that he would never run for public office again. That's why the Times said it was, this deal had probably terminated his political career. But they did make him resign from the office he was then holding. They figured that the shame of that would be enough to keep him from ever getting elected to anything again. His supporters were so mad in the wake of that deal. You might have thought for a minute that they would vote for him again if they could.
I thought he was one of the greatest men that this country has ever had.
What is your reaction to the resignation?
I think it's just a sad thing.
I'm just sick about it. I think he's a man of his word, and I think they've all been doing the same thing ever since I started voting, and I think it's just too bad. I think he's a great man.
I think it was very unnecessary. I'm just sick. I'm very unhappy. I don't think it was necessary. I think it's a lot of political hogwash, and
In the immediate aftermath of Agnew's plea deal, he's not going to prison, but he does have to resign office immediately. In the immediate aftermath of that deal, his supporters were so strongly in support of him. They were so upset at the charges against him. You might have thought the country was on the precipice of something terrible. But you know what? It passed. It took a little while. He stayed in the news for a few weeks, a few months. He was very mad about what had happened to him. But then he just faded out. He disappeared. His name all but disappeared from history. But it hasn't entirely disappeared. We do have his example. We have had experience with something like this before as a country. And whether you like how that worked out with him or not, whether you think that was justice or not, that is the real history of how the U.S. Department of Justice contended with these issues the last time they were confronted with something like this. I mean, here was a man who fully expected himself to be the next president of the United States. The U.S. Justice Department also expected that he might be about to become the next president of the United States. But the Justice Department also had evidence that he had committed dozens of felonies. He went nuts about the fact they were investigating him. He threatened them 9 ways to Sunday. He tried to shut down that investigation. He tried to bully them. He said he was going to come after them and turn the tables on them. But they did not back down. They confronted him with the evidence in court. And what happened? He pled. He pled to avoid jail. And they let him because he also agreed to leave public office. We have only ever done something like this once before as a country, and that's how we did it the last time. Now, does this mean that the Justice Department today is going to approach this second time around, this time with Trump, the same way they did with Agnew? We don't know. But the idea that Trump might plead, that he might negotiate to plead to something in exchange for lenience, that's something that's generally being dismissed out of hand right now, when perhaps it shouldn't be. I mean, particularly if it looks like there's a chance of jail time that attends to these charges for him, particularly if pleading guilty to something might be his only way to avoid jail time. The question of whether or not Trump's future eligibility for public office might be part of any such plea is something that everybody's afraid to touch with a 10-foot pole, I know. But we really have only ever done this once before. And that's the way we did it. We made his public office, his holding public office, part of the plea deal. That's the solution. The still controversial to this day solution that the Justice Department and the lawyers for the defendant came up with 50 years ago, the last time we were plagued with a problem this disgusting. And it's no use pretending that that isn't the relevant history here. It is. And I think we should not look that gift horse in the mouth. I think history is here to help.